All right. So again, hi everyone. Thanks for joining and welcome to this webinar. You have Connor Wolford speaking here as part of the Ranorex team. Today, we're essentially going to be showing you some exciting news related to an upcoming release that we have related to an enhanced BDD integration that we will be releasing to you all. That involves Ranorex Studio and Ranorex DesignWise. Ranorex DesignWise is a newer product that was brought on to the Ranorex suite of products. So we're looking forward to giving you all an exclusive preview of that today. I'm sure some people are still filing in here, but I say let's go ahead and kick this off. I will start moving through some slides here. So before we do begin, just be aware that you all have been placed on mute, but we do have the chat window and question windows available. If you'd like to put some questions, comments, reactions in there, we'll definitely have some time at the end to answer as many of those as we can, and hopefully throughout this presentation, as we keep an eye on that, we will be able to answer some of those as we go along too, naturally. So feel free to utilize those windows as you see fit, as well as just please be aware that this webinar is being recorded. This is live, but of course, to all that registered for this event, whether you actually attended or not, this recording will be available after the webinar via email, as well as posted online on our webinar recordings section on our website, on the Ranorex site. So just wanted to get rid of those, get through those housekeeping items there. And I say let's start to dive in here. So in terms of an agenda, you have myself presenting today along with a Ranorex solutions engineer, Aaron Stearns. Aaron will be presenting alongside me today here. And in terms of an agenda, we're going through intros now. We're going to give you all a quick overview of Ranorex DesignWise. Again, this is a newer product that's part of the Ranorex suite of products along with Ranorex Studio. Some of you at this point may be familiar with DesignWise, but because it is so relatively new, we'll still give a quick overview for those of you who are unfamiliar with it. And please do just note that at any point, we're willing to set up calls with you all to provide demos and whatnot. Just reach out to our team. We'll talk more about that later. But as well, we have done a previous more in-depth demo of Ranorex DesignWise in the recent past. The recording of that webinar is online on the Ranorex pre-recorded webinars page as well online on the site. So we'll cover that. And specifically what we'll actually spend more time on today and getting a little bit more in depth is this side of DesignWise called DesignWise Automate. Essentially, we're going to use this feature so that we can then quickly transition our scenarios and the scripts that we're building inside DesignWise that will be optimized for coverage and efficiency's sake. We'll be able to quickly transition those then into Ranorex Studio, kind of using Ranorex Studio's BDD related capabilities so that not only now are you getting an optimized test design portion of your work, and you can approach kind of automation with 100% confidence now with DesignWise, but of course then we can quickly automate those optimized scenarios inside Studio. So we'll walk through what that is going to look like as well. We'll give an exclusive preview of it. The release is upcoming. And then of course we'll leave some time for Q&A as well. So that's the agenda for today. I'll be kicking things off for a bit here as well before I turn things over to Aaron. Just also want to point out that Aaron has so kindly placed the Ranorex DesignWise trial sign-up link inside the chat window here. Feel free to utilize that at any point. We have 30-day free trials available for DesignWise. Maybe some of you have already taken advantage of those, but those are available for you to sign up at any time to really start to check it out on your own and perform any POCs, evaluations, what have you, just to poke around. So that's the agenda for today. I say let's go ahead and get started with the first portion here. So again, we've covered this before in more depth in a previous webinar. Some of you have maybe even started to try out the tool, but I want to give another quick overview of what DesignWise is, this new product under the suite of Ranorex products. So let's do that first. So what is DesignWise? DesignWise is essentially a test design optimization tool. It is a standalone tool that can be used alongside Ranorex Studio. It can really be used in any sort of tool chain, whether you're using Studio or not. Today we'll be talking about how it's used alongside Studio and how we're better integrating these capabilities inside Studio. But just know that it is a standalone cloud-based offering that we have. And essentially, you're going to use DesignWise, unlike really most tools on the market, you're going to use it to essentially quickly generate extremely optimized sets of tests and scenarios that can then be placed into a test automation solution like Ranorex Studio, as well as a test management tool or any other kind of testing tools that you have in your tool chain at your organization. So DesignWise, I want to make clear that it is broadly applicable. We have seen it used across a wide variety of industries across the globe, whether it's financial services, banking, wealth management, insurance, healthcare, retail. It really is broadly applicable because of the setup of the tool and what you'll kind of see today in this quick overview portion. But it's not only applicable in terms of, or broadly applicable in terms of the industry, it's also broadly applicable with the types of testing that you're working on, whether that's kind of UI testing, functional testing, API testing, systems integration testing. This standalone test design tool really is broadly applicable. Again, you'll see why that's the case and how that comes to life as we move inside the tool, but just keep that in mind. Now, on the left-hand side of this slide, I want to make it abundantly clear what DesignWise is and what it is not. It is a standalone test design tool. It is really differentiated in that sense. There are other tools out there and solutions that might claim they do a little bit of test design or whatnot, but really this tool is meant to dive really deep into that segment of the process there. So to put it another way, it's not meant to replace any test automation capabilities that you have or test management capabilities that you have. It's meant to complement those. It's meant to be used alongside them. And the export options that we talk about today, and more specifically, the export options related to Ranorex Studio, you'll see how it complements those other solutions as well. It's meant to be as agnostic as possible, though, for those reasons. So that's really what DesignWise is all about, a test design optimization tool. I won't spend too much time on this diagram here, but just know that it's an overview of essentially what the test design process looks like inside DesignWise that we'll also kind of walk through today at a high level. But basically, we're going to build a model of critical testing factors inside the tool. We're going to take that step to kind of critically analyze our requirements, user stories, known issues, prior testing efforts, whatever those sources of information are, to essentially decide upon, here's what's critical to test. Here are the ideas then that the optimized DesignWise rule-based algorithm is essentially going to use to give us several optimized outputs, namely optimized tests. We are going to be now approaching our automation efforts and execution efforts and planning efforts with 100% confidence in what we are covering. And we're also going to be doing so and covering all of that in as an efficient set of tests as possible with the algorithm. So we're going to get that. We are going to see how you will be provided with detailed coverage reports that really differentiate the solution as well, to give you clear insights into exactly what you are covering in your test set, what you are not covering, and be able to communicate all of that to stakeholders too as you're kind of going through your test planning activities. That's all really important, and it's also really difficult to do if you don't have a solution in place, if you're just trying to do that on your own, as I'm sure kind of we've all experienced before. Last thing I'll mention is we're going to be able to develop skeletal automated tests based on all of the optimization and the scenarios that we've created so far in DesignWise to then place into a tool like Studio, and we'll walk through that specific process today, of course. So that's what DesignWise is really all about, and what it is not, to make that as clear as possible. So before we get inside the tool for the quick overview, just want to point out, kind of and set the stage and provide some context into really what we're going to be able to do with this powerful test design solution. So what we find a lot when clients approach us is a lot of times they're coming to us with several issues that they're looking for DesignWise to address. But a lot of times really we hear that, either companies are facing issues with kind of creating too few tests that are leaving significant critical gaps in coverage that are, of course, then leading to costly bug fixes, bugs slipping through into production, user acceptance testing, systems integration testing, bottom line, later down the line where they get a lot more expensive to address. And on the right-hand side of this diagram, as we're seeing, sometimes we see folks on the other side of that where they're generating too many tests. And those test suites are becoming bloated over time, really largely redundant, and there's a lot of kind of wasteful repetition of the same things being looked at over and over again, which result in delays and wastes and difficult to maintain over time and whatnot. So we have those two sides of the spectrum, and in both instances, the costs of testing plus development can be extremely high. We hear that a bunch. And so what we're going to be able to do at DesignWise as you start to try it out and whatnot and learn more about it is we're going to hit this sweet spot where we're not generating too many tests, we're not generating too few tests, we're generating the right tests in as optimized of a fashion as possible so that we get the coverage that we need. We're going to give ourselves the best chance at catching as many defects as possible by filling in any gaps in coverage and eliminating the waste. And we're also going to do so in as an efficient number of tests as possible. And that's the power of using an algorithm like the one that's inside DesignWise and what you'll see inside the tool there. So, this tool does have the answers in terms of what coverage is enough for a given effort, how much testing is enough, which areas of the product are most critical to test, and therefore which areas do we need to hit the hardest in terms of how much coverage we should be achieving there, how many tests do I actually need to run, which tests, and when should I run them. The tool is really going to provide answers to all of those questions, which is really awesome, as we really try to put quality first in all of our organizations and teams, of course. And by the way, like all of this is going to ultimately save you time as well and make your lives a lot easier and better, which is pretty nice to see. So that's kind of the challenge that we're going to address head on with DesignWise. And these are the benefits that we'll see come out of that. We'll show this slide and then we'll jump inside the tool here so you can see how all of this comes to life. But just know that really every single time, especially once you get the hang of the approach, you're going to experience significant time savings in the test planning phase. You're seeing some averages there on my screen in terms of what we see whenever there's kind of a before and after analysis done at one of our clients, but you're just going to be able to select tests at a much faster rate and the right tests with this approach than any kind of traditional approaches that you might have used to designing tests, whether that's kind of like by hand in Excel or right inside a test automation tool or a test management tool. We can just now use a much more scientific, fast approach to getting to the tests that we need. So time savings during test planning, you're going to just every single time with the tool's detailed coverage reports have the ability to really understand coverage at a much more precise rate, as well as during test execution, time and effort savings as well. We're going to give ourselves the best chance of catching as many defects as possible, as early as possible in the process. So we're spending less time addressing those and not allowing them to slip through into production UAT and whatnot, as we talked about. So we see time savings there, but also just the fact that a lot of times with the tool, you're going to just be executing and running and maintaining fewer tests because we're going to make these tests as efficient and as thorough as possible to eliminate the waste that we might have seen before in the way in which we used to design tests on our own. So that's another huge benefit, for the business case for this tool, as well as just the fact that we're going to be able to start to contribute to our automation efforts backed by all of this optimization that we're doing by creating tests that actually require less coding on our own, and how that then transitions into a tool like Studio. So that's a big one there too. So I say with that, let's jump inside the tool. I'm going to provide a little bit more of a high-level overview of some of the key features of the tool. I'm not going to go as in depth as we did on our previous DesignWise webinar. Some of you may have attended that, which is awesome. If not, if you want a more comprehensive in-depth demo of the tool on its own, that webinar is a great resource. We have it posted online as a recording on the Ranorex site, so feel free to refer to that, as well as just reach out to us. We're happy to provide a customized, detailed, in-depth demo for you and your teams as well at any point. So just keep that in mind. We'll keep it relatively high level today, but we're really going to spend actually then, before we transition over to Studio, on DesignWise Automate, the side of the tool that really relates to test automation and how to start to transition into those capabilities. So moving inside the tool now here, we're really looking at a DesignWise test plan here. So when you first open up the side of the tool and you sign up for a trial, right, which we've posted the trial link inside the chat, Aaron has done that. Feel free to use that at any point. It's 30 days for DesignWise and it's a 14-day trial for Ranorex Studio. But what you're seeing on my screen here, getting back to this, is a DesignWise test plan. So whenever you first essentially open up the tool, you're going to create a test plan and you need to decide on what's the scope of that test plan. Within this test plan and the scenarios that will generate within it, what are they addressing? What's the scope that they're addressing? I have a very, very simplistic example here that I just wanted to use to get these points across today, related to just think of a very simplistic airline ticket reservation scope where we want to functionally test all the different paths through that. Kept it simple for a reason intentionally. Again, inside the tool, when you sign up for a trial, we have a lot of more comprehensive, detailed, realistic sample test plans for you to look at for different use cases, different industries, different types of testing that you're doing. As well as at any point, we can show you more examples in a demo or whatnot. But for this simplistic example, we're using an airline ticket reservation. And after you decide on the scope, okay, what are we going to be testing within this test plan comprehensively? You then take this first and most important step, which is defining the critical parameters, the different variation ideas, this model of them, that the tool is then going to use to just quickly generate an optimized set of tests or scenarios for us. So we take this first and most important step. We are gathering these ideas that you're seeing on my screen here from requirements, user stories, known issues from previous testing efforts before. Perhaps you're talking to business analysts or other stakeholders. Whatever those sources of information are, we decide on what's critical to test. These are the ideas that are going to be shown and tested thoroughly with one another in our optimized scenarios that the tool is going to generate for us. So of course, this is a really important step. There are a couple ways that you can build out these models, technically speaking. You can do so right inside the UI, either by adding new parameters here, parameters and parameter values. You can kind of do it in a more bulk edit way, as we call it. It's a text-based way to add all of this. I tend to use this more because I can copy and paste as well. If I'm reusing parameters and variation ideas from other models that I've built in the past, just insert them right in here. But we have a couple ways that we can do that. And of course, just for the avoidance of doubt here, on the left, we have our parameters. They're the critical factors that we're testing ultimately in this airline process. And then in the middle here, we have the different ways in which those factors are varying. Like, for example, of course, what are the options from where we can fly from? This is super limited, of course, with these three options, but I think you still get the idea of what we can do here. So we can either add that here. I also want to flash up, though, this view. It's the mind map view. It's really simplistic in this example. You can imagine it can get really built out here, but this mind map is actually really powerful. It might seem simple, but as you build out these models, you're able to take this view, right, to a stakeholder, a manager, a business analyst, and say, here's what I believe based on the requirements that have been handed to me and my subject matter expertise to some level of what's critical to test and how I'm thinking of testing those ideas. What do you think, business analyst? And you'll get feedback and say, you forgot about these ideas. These ones are not as important. Let's actually leave them out of the model. Let's change how we're testing flying to actually here. Bottom line is you get feedback. You can clearly communicate what you're testing, how you're testing it. Everyone's getting on the same page about all of this. And as you get that feedback then in those conversations and in that work, the beauty of this model-based approach that we're taking here is that all you have to do is make updates to the model wherever, using the various methods that I mentioned. Everything else will get automatically updated from there. Your scenarios will incorporate those changes automatically. Scripts will, your analysis reports. So as we get feedback or as new requirements come out and we need to update things, it's a lot easier to do that now. We now no longer have to go line by line wherever we're storing all of this without a tool like DesignWise and sift through what we should be changing and whatnot. It's really straightforward here in how you can do that. I'll just mention as well, we have a couple import options. You can actually import mind map files from a mind mapping tool to auto-populate what you're seeing here. You can also import Excel files, specifically formatted ones to just be DesignWise friendly, but we have templates of all of this too inside the tool. So when you start a test plan, you do have the option of importing some files too. I'll keep it at that level, high level for now. But last thing I'll just say before we move on to these other steps, inside your accounts, and especially just in the trial, whenever you sign up, there's this DesignWise Foundations course. It's a 1-hour self-paced online course that will walk you through not only the main features of the tool, but also like the mindset that it takes to build out these models of parameters and best practices there and whatnot. So that's available in every account, whether it's a trial or a paid account. I highly encourage all of you to at least take that. You'll get a nice certificate at the end that you can post online and add to your LinkedIn profiles and whatnot. So you can at least do that. And every single paid account, if you were to ever move forward with purchasing DesignWise, will include foundations, but also this more comprehensive professional course as well that really dives deep into this approach and the tool and how to use it and whatnot. So wanted to just call those out too as you're exploring the option. Okay, so we defined our parameters. Maybe along the way as well, we need to define some rules and specifically some constraints. So what we can do here is, it's important to note that in this parameter models, everything's independent of one another. It's just kind of a collection of the ideas that in some way, shape, or form we know are critical to test. So we can head to our constraints then to kind of actually then define some dependencies and say, okay, let's define some ideas that actually should never show up in a test together ultimately because they're impossible to test for based on business rules or how the application works. You can do that inside constraints using these invalid pairs in red. These will never now be tested. I just made up this example. Let's say it's impossible to offer a business class ticket when you're traveling to the Philippines. Those airlines don't offer that or something. Just an example, but you see what I mean there. As well as we can kind of do the opposite and tie certain values together in green, kind of creating when-then statements. This particular value and idea should always be tested with this other value and none of the other values, kind of the opposite of an invalid pair, right? So we can do all of that. We've actually added some more advanced capabilities here that allow you to outline all of this in a more text-based way with these operators that will guide you along the way. We've also added some more advanced types of logic that you can add, like this fourth option here, which is a skip constraint to say, okay, if we're traveling to the Philippines, then I actually want to skip overall parameters that are irrelevant to that specific business scenario. These options get grayed out on the UI when we select the Philippines. They're irrelevant. Let's just skip those parameters in our test scenarios. Then all of those different types of kind of conditions and conditional branching logic, you can also outline inside the tool as well to say skip, this particular parameter overall, or these, specific parameters if you want to go plural there. So that's constraints. We're essentially using that capability to ensure that when we click this button now, all of our optimized tests are valid. They're possible to test for. So talking about this scenario screen real quick before we get to the analysis and then DesignWise Automate that I want to spend a little time on, it's important to just at a high level understand the power of these tests here. So it's important to note, I like to hover over this I real quick to let everyone know that within that parameters model that we defined, that was super simplistic, don't get me wrong, for this example, it's still saying that within just those couple of sets of parameters, we actually have 162 possible scenarios or tests that we could potentially run if we were to try to test everything. Now, I will say, as soon as if we were to build upon this parameter models, or you're using this in your own work, you will start to see that total possible scenario count immediately start to significantly and exponentially increase to, I'm talking millions, billions, quadrillions, what have you. Because as we add more parameters, there's just so many more possibilities that we could potentially test. And of course, we're not going to try to cover everything, even in this example with the 162 scenarios. What we're instead going to focus on with this algorithm, and instead of writing tests on our own, is to basically say, okay, let's focus on the interactions of these ideas that typically have been known to trigger defects. It's been academically proven as well as just practically proven over the years when this approach is used in companies, Fortune 500 companies across the world, that the majority of defects can be caught by really accounting for two types of interactions within an effort that you're working on. Number one, within that majority bucket is some defects are just caused by a single idea appearing in a test. Maybe this idea of a coach class alone triggers some kind of defect. Sometimes that happens, it's unfortunate, but let's hope it wouldn't happen in this example, but some defects are triggered that way. Taking that a step further though, still within that majority bucket of how defects are caused, a lot of defects are triggered by two ideas being tested up against one another. So in this example, think coach flying to the United States or flying from India to the Philippines. All of those groups or pairs of values, a lot of times those are what will catch defects. Catching defects beyond that, with testing, let's say groups of 3 ideas together or 4 ideas or 5 or so on, those just become more rare and more rare. And so instead, let's focus on how the majority of defects are caused, which are these two types of interactions. And what this algorithm will do is just instantly come up with every single possible one of those interactions that typically trigger defects and do so and cover 100% of them in as mathematically few tests as possible. No human brain, at least this quickly, by clicking a button, could beat this algorithm in doing that essentially. So what we're doing here in this example is we are covering 77 unique pairs of ideas based on how defects are typically triggered, 77 unique pairs in just 11 tests. If you were to put 2 fingers on the screen here, putting aside any constraints that we've added, any 2 fingers on a screen here, I guarantee those 2 ideas show up at least once somewhere in these 11 tests. And because that's how defects are triggered, let's just account for every single one of those, do so in as mathematically few tests as possible. We're going to fill in our gaps in coverage. Each of these tests are going to be as highly varied as possible, packing in as much net new coverage of interactions as possible in each test. And by the time you get to test 11, you have tested 100% of those and you can move on. And a lot of times that will do the job. That is a great way, as some of our clients put it, of exercising your requirements and covering what you need to cover. But just know, I won't get into too much detail today. You have options in terms of if you want to turn the coverage dial up and instead cover every triplet of ideas, you can. I see a question here from Ken. You can do that here. You're going to see your test case count increase, sometimes more significantly than other times, but you have that option. You can go all the way up to 4-way, 5-way, and actually 6-way. We only had 5 parameters here, so 6-way isn't going to show in this example, but we have that option. It's more just for fun. But more importantly, too, this is a heavily used feature. It's called mixed strength interactions. This is where we can actually turn the coverage dial up for specific, maybe more risk-prone areas of our requirements in our systems, and maybe deprioritize some others, either by just sticking to 2-way coverage or maybe even 1-way, not doing combinatorial coverage at all. So it's a way to really get super targeted, account for risk-based efforts. This should be a highly used feature to do that, and it's also a great way then to not increase your test case count too much as you would if you went from overall 2-way to 3-way or something like that. I see just a quick question on expected results. I'll just answer that real quick. Enforced interactions. I encourage you to check this in more detail outside of the webinar, but this is a way to define specific interactions that you absolutely want to appear in your tests on top of, let's say, every 2-way or pair of ideas. So let's say like there's even just one that's defined by 3 or maybe 4 ideas. This would only show up in a set of 4-way tests or be guaranteed to be covered in a set of 4-way. But if we want to stick to 2-way, we can override the strength there and just make sure that this one now shows up and actually tie maybe a special expected outcome to that. And that would appear next to any test that satisfies that scenario. So you're seeing the bolded row here in test case 1. We then prioritize that scenario. It's now guaranteed to show up while sticking to mixed strength or 2-way tests. And you'll see the expected outcome appear at least once, and maybe by chance it'll be covered somewhere else as well. So that's a way to do that. But really, again, you're seeing how we're going to objectively just generate better tests with this algorithm than anything we could kind of create on our own, getting super targeted and confident there, and also doing so in as mathematically few tests as possible. So think more coverage, fewer tests. And with that as well, as you're kind of working on all of this, we have several just analysis capabilities. One is the coverage matrix. I'll just focus on this today. This is a way to view the exact coverage that's being achieved after executing X number of those tests that have been generated for you. So let's say, after the first 7 out of 11 tests that have been generated for us, let's view what we're achieving here where the slider is right now. We're actually already at 80% coverage. A lot of times you might actually get to 80% coverage way sooner than this in a larger, more complex model and example. But here, where the slider is, we're at 7 tests, or let's see what the coverage is after 7 tests. And with this matrix and the 2 axes, you can see exactly what we would be covering after just running the first 7 out of those 11 tests. Green squares are going to be interactions that have been covered so far. You'll see specifically which ones and when they were first covered. Red square is going to be interactions that have not been covered yet, but you'll see when they would first be covered. And perhaps we get confident enough because we can view exactly what we would be missing if we stop testing here if we're under a time crunch and say, this is enough. Let's just move on. Let's, take our bets with kind of what we would be missing here if we stop testing here. And, at least we're able to articulate it and see that and make a conscious decision. You might actually see this and say, I want to execute a few more tests, cover more green there, maybe actually get to 100% where we're at all green. Black squares, by the way, are just any constraints that we've added that will never be paired together. But you have options, and this is to help you make really data-driven, precise decisions about all of this and be able to communicate that to stakeholders, as well as maybe there'll be instances where you want to stop testing here and you're okay with missing some red squares, but you wish that some of these other ones that you could cover sooner in the first 5. You actually have ways in which inside the tool that you can reprioritize some of these to have them show up sooner, let's say within the first 5 tests. Still stop testing at this point and kind of save you time in your efforts, but still covering what you want to cover. So there's a lot of options here is the bottom line. Inside the trial, encourage you to check all of this out, reach out to us as you have questions or are developing use cases on your own and want us to review some of that. We're happy to do all of that. Those trials are meant to be supported as well, where you can reach out to us to get feedback or questions and answers that you need. So I just want to make that abundantly clear too, because I know I'm intentionally moving at a high level today quickly, but I hope all that generally makes sense so far. So different analysis tools, again, more data-driven insights, better conversations we're going to have. We're getting more confident about our execution efforts and our planning efforts. That's all great, right? So the last thing I want to touch on today related to DesignWise before I turn it over to Aaron for automation in Studio and how these two relate to one another is let's look at the connecting point to those tools here. This is DesignWise Automate. We have a couple scripting capabilities aligned to whatever kind of you're doing in your organization, but this is one of them. And this is the one that relates, one of the options that relates well to Studio in terms of kind of writing out BDD scripts. But let's talk about what's going on here. Now, when you first open up this screen, you're going to have kind of a blank slate to work off of. This is something that is meant for you to script out on your own. But the tool will give you a template. I'll just kind of create a new one so you can see what that looks like and might build a couple lines just so you can see it in real time. But this is what you'll start off with, a template. But what we're doing here in this built out example that I've written is, as you're seeing, is we're kind of using this gherkin setup, this given when then setup that aligns really well with behavior-driven development efforts, as I'm sure a lot of you all are aware, to really clearly describe what we're testing, what are our objectives, per requirement or what have you. Not only what we're testing, but how we're testing it, just kind of in a clear, descriptive way. So I've done that here. And along the way too, what I'm doing is I am parameterizing these steps. I'm pulling in the parameters from that model that we defined and the tests that we've created. So if I just kind of create a new line here, add another statement, you can see that at any point I can add parameters from our list to build this out. Now, as we do that, on the right-hand side, we have a preview of what our feature file export option would look like in real time. So you can see with this scenario option, at least that I've built on the left, what the tool will automatically do then is actually generate a unique scenario block and set of steps for every applicable test that has been generated for you in that scenarios table that we initially saw. So here you're seeing what the scenario and set of steps would look like for test 1. You're seeing the data injected here where those test parameter placeholders are. And these are just the data that's coming from that scenarios table that we saw in the same exact order. So you're seeing the scenario for test case 2 and 3 and so on. It's truncated, but you would see the full 11 tests there in the actual output that you would export. This is just meant to be a preview, but you're seeing that as even you use kind of this BDD style language that's really great for a lot of reasons, you're inherently making these steps data-driven as well. By inserting the parameter placeholders, we're just going to start cycling through the optimized data, as you can think of it, within that scenarios table that we got to ensure that we're running the right tests as well and the right data to get the coverage that we need. A couple other things I'll just mention here. We have options. So scenario is what we're going to use to transition into Studio. That's what Studio is going to accept. But we also have a scenario outline format if you're working outside Studio too. Some people like to see instead with a scenario outline actually a data table generated, which with each of these rows being our scenarios in the same exact order as well. Totally is user preference there and what you're working on, but that is another option here. And then for the avoidance of doubt too, These scripts can, of course, look however way you'd like. You might just want to include some parameters that are addressing a very specific then statement or expected result in one scenario block. And then maybe, just as an example, I'll just copy this one. You want to create a second scenario block that's looking at some other specific expected result. You can do all of that, or maybe you want to create a new feature file that's looking at something entirely different. Bottom line is you're just pulling what you need to pull from that optimized set of test scenarios that have been generated for you to get the coverage that you need within these scenario blocks. We can actually even get really targeted here and say, I'm going to switch back to scenario here for a second, but actually let's keep it to outline so you can clearly see what I'm about to do. Maybe I only want to pull the scenarios that had just flying from India and keep everything else kind of more broad. You're seeing in the data table now, we'll now only pull the tests that had India from flying from there. And so now you can get really targeted with these scenario blocks and pull what you need to pull to accomplish what you need to accomplish in a given set of steps. So pretty cool there. Now, in terms of Studio, first requirement is that you need to be setting up a scenario. This is what Studio is going to accept. I'm going to save this. I'm going to delete this extra one that I just added for examples. Now, the way we transition out of the tool, there's obviously a wide array of options, no matter kind of what your tool chain looks like. We try to make it as agnostic as possible with some customized options for certain tools that we've, have worked to develop customized export options for over the years. But one option here, when we go to export, is this automated test framework option that we'll focus on today, really, to see how we can transition into Studio using this enhanced BDD integration that we're going to be releasing. But you're seeing some of the other options here. There might be some options where all we need is the optimized data. We can download a CSV from the tool and just kind of get that optimized table and do whatever we'd like with it. But in this example, let's, of course, specifically look at how this integrates and works with Ranorex Studio. So we're going to head to the automated test framework option here. In general, what this option is used for is to take all the optimization that you've done in the tool so far, as well as kind of the plain English scripts that you've written in DesignWise Automate. You take all of that and then you use this feature to actually start to generate some skeletal code in different languages and frameworks to then feed into your automation efforts. It's meant to be skeletal. It's meant to be a starting point, the artifacts that you will download for you to then build off of from there with glue code, actionable code, kind of extra work that whatever kind of extra work you might need to do to just make everything run. And you'll see how that looks in Studio in a moment too. So what we do, again, we go here, and for Studio specifically, we're going to choose the C# option with SpecFlow. And what this is going to do now is, as Studio accepts this, right, is it's going to download some artifacts for us. I've actually already downloaded them for the sake of time here, but we get a zip file, and the contents of that C# SpecFlow output is this right here. We're going to get a step definitions file. You're kind of starting to see that skeletal code here in that particular language framework setup. We're going to get an action words file too, if we need that, as well as just kind of the plain old feature file with all those scenarios that I mentioned before that are relevant for each test case. So you get those artifacts here, the step definitions file, the action words file. This is the starting point. It's the skeletal code base for you to work off from there to then feed into Studio. So what we're now going to do, Aaron, if you're ready for this, is we're going to take these artifacts, right? And what Aaron Stearns is going to show you all is how we take these artifacts and make it all run inside Studio. So basically what you're going to be able to do now, and we'll wrap this up afterwards, if you all think about it and step back, we're now going to be, with these two tools, able to, of course, perform sufficient and efficient automation. But within that automation, we have 100% confidence in what we're actually automating to get the coverage that we need. So Aaron, I think with that, let's turn it over to you, and I'll keep monitoring the questions, and just know we'll save some time at the end for Q&A, and I'll try to answer some in the meantime as well. So Aaron, over to you.
Sure thing, Connor. Can you hear me first of all?
Yes, we can. I'm changing presenter to you.
All right, great. Thank you. Let's see here. Just want to make sure that that you can see my screen. Just let me know if in fact you can see my screen, please.
Yep, Aaron, we can see that.
Great, excellent. So First of all, thank you, Connor. That's a really good look into DesignWise and getting everything set up in DesignWise. And so where I'm going to be taking over here is what Connor said, taking a look at what we get from DesignWise and then how we're going to use that with Studio. So I just have one slide here that I want to take a look at with everyone before we take a look at Studio itself. Now, of course, this is a sneak peek. This is something that that's in development that we'll have fairly soon. But I wanted to show the workflow of how this is going to work. So in my slide here, you'll see in this first image that we're going to have the ability to add an existing item, which is the item that we're getting from DesignWise, which is the step definitions file, the action words file. So we're adding an existing item, and that is bringing in a C# file that we're then going to be able to use in Ranorex Studio. So you can see in my second image down here, we're going to have the skeletal code, and it's important to mention again what Connor had said about skeletal code. That is, we're going to have the scaffolding laid out of what needs to be done, which is going to serve as an excellent guide for how then to automate these tests to get that 100% coverage, to get the coverage that we want. So when you're looking at here, you'll see these pending, which are basically placeholders in each one of these methods. So that's what we're going to be replacing with our code that we have in Ranorex. So let me jump over to Ranorex Studio for a second here. And I know we have an audience who is mixed as far as their experience with DesignWise and with Ranorex Studio. So I'm going to keep this fairly broad and general for those of you who have used Ranorex Studio in the past, but maybe have only used the recording functionality, the record and playback functionality. Perhaps you've not seen what we're going to look at here. So hopefully this is something applicable to the entire audience here. But basically what we're looking at here is a very simple Ranorex solution. This is a test suite. There's very little in this test suite. And we have just a simple recording here with user code, one user code action. And the reason I have this here is because this shows you how to use Ranorex, how to use the Ranorex spy tool, how we're going to track elements in an application and then use those in code for our solution. So if we think back to what we just saw in the slide as far as the methods that get generated in the C# files that we're getting from DesignWise, and we're bringing those in to Ranorex Studio, we need to replace those placeholder values with something. And in this case, this is kind of what you would be replacing the placeholder values with. Inside of each one of those methods, you would be using elements that you have in your repo that you've tracked in your application, and you would be creating actions with them. So what do I mean by that? So we have our Ranorex spy tool, and our Ranorex spy tool allows us to track elements within an application. So you can see if I bring up this application, this is our demo application, our demo desktop application. And of course, there are a number of different items in this, elements in this application. So if I go and I track one of them, in this case, I tracked the entire container here. And so this is what we're seeing. We're seeing a container, but we have access to all of these different elements in our application. So if I want to go and add those elements, I can add those elements individually to my element repository. So my element repository looks like this. In this case, I have just 3 elements here. This is a text field and a button to press. It's just a couple of elements, but you can see the important thing to touch on here is that we have a repository of items, and this is a central repository of items that we can then access and use in our code modules. And the code file or files that we're getting from DesignWise, we're going to be using those repo elements in those code files. So some of the benefits of having the repo are that you have one central repository, and so the maintainability of your tests are very maintainable because you're not worried about, let's say, having unique paths, unique Ranorex paths. And when I say Ranorex paths, this is what I'm talking about here. This is the path to a given element. You're not writing out hard-coded variables that are, a variable name and then the entire path to an element and then interacting with that in the C# file that you're getting from DesignWise. You're pulling directly from the repo, in this case, using this dot notation repo Rx mainframe, and then enter your name is the name of your item that you have here in your object that you have. And so you're able to use these items without worrying about having them all over the place. And this is especially important once you have, let's say you have multiple files. You wouldn't want to have hard-coded path values in different files that, let's say something changes about the application and you need to go back in. All of a sudden maintainability would be a big issue because you would have to go and you'd have to change these paths individual in each file. In this case, you don't have to do that. You have your central repository of items and you're using those items. And because we have IntelliSense and even the ability to drag an item right up into user code and just drop it here in user code, it really cuts down on the need to even write code in a lot of situations, especially when it comes to simpler actions like clicks or key sequences, and avoid having to write a lot of the code and just some of the additional logic that you might have to write, like conditional statements, or if you have to increment values or whatever it may be, you might have to write that out, but you are able to cut down on a lot of the code that you would have to write, because not only do you have the skeletal code that's coming in from DesignWise, but now you have the ability to use your items from your repo, which you're just either using IntelliSense to complete the lines of code, or you're clicking and dragging directly from your repo and bringing them in. So it cuts down on time. It makes it very efficient to write the tests, to write the actual automation code once you've gotten rid of your placeholder values. And so you have a quick workflow coming from the test design steps within DesignWise, and then the actual creation of the automation code in Ranorex Studio. So the workflow is quick and it's fairly seamless. And I wanted to mention as well, I know Connor had shown just briefly, DesignWise is a tool that creates a number of different types of artifacts that you can use with Ranorex Studio. So in this approach, if we're taking the BDD approach, right, we're bringing in these C# files from DesignWise, but in some cases, for those of you who have used Ranorex Studio and you are only using the record and playback functionality of the tool, of course, you also have the ability, like Connor had shown, you can export your data that you want to use in your data-driven tests as a CSV file or as an Excel file, and you can bring that into a test that you have already developed in Ranorex Studio, and you create a couple of variables. All of this is the codeless approach, and then you are data driving your test that way. So DesignWise is a really flexible and robust and powerful tool because you can create a number of different kinds of artifacts, and you can approach your automated testing in a couple of different ways, all of which has the benefit of the data and the coverage that you're getting from your test design in DesignWise. So that's mainly what I wanted to show, because I know this is really a teaser more than anything of the functionality that we're going to be showing with our BDD integration with DesignWise. But this is just to give an idea of how the two tools will play together very well. Once you have those files that you're downloading, those C# files that you're getting from DesignWise, you're bringing them in here just with the add existing item, and then you can bring in, once you've tracked your elements in your application, you can bring those elements right in and start automating your tests. So hopefully that's a good overview of how the two tools will work well together, and how the BDD integration will really look for a user who's going to be using both DesignWise and Ranorex Studio, or one or the other, to see how the two will work together. So with all that being said, I think I'm going to jump back here to the conclusion slide. Connor, I believe we have a conclusion section here just briefly, and I'll leave my screen up if you wanted to just cover what's here in the conclusion itself.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron, and thank you for that excellent overview. And again, it's an exclusive preview today of what's to come. We will be notifying everyone once this is fully released, this updated BDD integration, but we're really looking forward to it and looking forward to your feedback as well once it is out there. So we will absolutely be in a communication via email and such, as well as future topics and sessions and webinars on these topics as well. To really go into even more depth. So thank you to all of you that have joined today. In terms of concluding, again, just to really wrap it all up, we talked about the savings and the benefits and the value that you can get out of taking a, just bottom line, a more systematic, smarter approach to the way in which you are selecting and documenting the tests that you need to run before just kind of turning right to automation and going from there. So DesignWise is going to be able to help with all of that. We talked about the savings during the planning and execution phases, the ability to just kind of get more confident with all of this is the bottom line. These approaches have been used at organizations over the years and have really been demonstrated to provide an immense amount of value when it comes to everything that we talked about today. So I'm hoping that we hear from some, if not all of you, and how this, and have some conversations about how this can specifically be adapted and used within your own organization and teams. We're here at your disposal to help with that once you sign up for a trial and such. But just to wrap it all up, really, not only do we now have Ranorex Studio, which has been proven to provide immense value in kind of efficiently and systematically automating what you need to automate, but now with this enhanced upcoming BDD integration with DesignWise, not only are the two tools going to be connecting to each other a lot more seamlessly, but we can approach now our automated execution with 100% confidence, really, in all of that coverage and efficiency. So I just wanted to wrap up with that, to really wrap up all of these thoughts that we've shared with you today. We hope that we start to hear from some of you all through trials and reaching out to us to support you all during that evaluation process. We have a couple minutes here to field perhaps a couple more questions. I know we got one from you, Feng Li, I see here related to, let's start with this one. Can DesignWise take parameters that have an infinite number of possibilities like birthday? That is the perfect question to ask you, Feng, so I appreciate you raising it. It's a really insightful one, and it's one that, going through the trials and the foundations courses will actually address head on. But at a high level, to answer that, really, again, this idea of kind of taking this model-based first approach to designing tests is a different way of thinking to probably what a lot of people were doing, prior to this approach, and kind of writing tests by hand. So we start with these models, and as part of that change in mindset, really, part of that is kind of approaching these types of parameters that you, Feng, mentioned, like birthday or age ranges and things like that, where there really are an infinite number of possibilities, approaching those in a different way. So if we were to just list out a bunch of random birthdays or try to cover all of them, we would generate way too many tests, because there'd be a lot more parameter values for DesignWise to cover, generating way too many tests that are really unnecessary. You'd probably still get some gaps in coverage there. And it's just not worth our time to do all of that. Instead, we really discuss with our clients, and we have plenty of materials and such and courses on this too, but what we focus on is actually taking a step back on those types of parameters and focusing more on kind of like a more abstracted approach to them. One example of that is using an equivalence class approach. You'd be using this probably a decent amount when you're using the tool. So for something like birthdays, instead of just listing out a bunch of birthdays, we take a step back and say, how can we actually kind of group those ages or birthdays in meaningful ways that kind of behave in similar ways based on how they interact with the system, to still get the coverage we need without generating too many tests. So there are different ways that you could group kind of ages together But let's say one example is, let's just say we create meaningful age ranges. So let's take an insurance application, for example, where, really between the ages of 18 to 25, 26, any ages within that range, let's just hypothetically say, all impact the behavior of the system under test in relatively, if not exactly, the same way. So instead of listing all of those out as individual parameters and getting really detailed coverage of all of them, let's instead just get coverage of the idea of that age range. And we say, by defining a parameter value that's simply just a range of 18 to 26, that any value within that range, or any idea within that range, is all behaving in the same way. And then maybe we have a second parameter value that says the next age range, 27 to 35. Maybe within that range, they all are behaving in a similar way. And you're seeing now, by doing that, we'll now get overall coverage of that specific age range, that idea, without generating too many tests and just listing out every individual age, if that's not something we need to do. Because what we were saying by modeling in that way, right, Yufeng, is that at its core, when we talk about coverage in the business behavior, what actually matters is that we get full idea or full coverage of that idea of a younger person, 18 to 26. And then next is like a middle-aged person or what have you. And that's what really matters in terms of coverage. So I know that's just kind of at a high level, and I'm talking to this kind of in an abstract way. We have lots of documentation online on the Ranorex DesignWise site about that specific topic, and we're happy to cover it more in like a more customized demo, or in the trials and in the courses. So just let us know how we can help if you have specific examples that you'd like to look at. But I hope that at least starts to get you thinking about that topic a little bit more. Have time maybe for like one last quick question, if there are any that you'd like to put in. If not, really appreciate everyone's questions so far. And hopefully this isn't the last time that we see some of these names. Okay, if there aren't any, here's again, I've put a bunch of links in the chat there, how you can get in touch with us to set up a demo or answer questions about your trial, as well as the different trial sign-up links, not only for the 14-day studio trial, but also the 30-day DesignWise trial. So highly encourage you all to check all of that out. Those are there to really kind of get a full evaluation for yourself for the tools, and let us know how we can help. We're here for it. So I think with that, let's wrap things up today, right on time. Thank you all for joining this webinar. I hope you found it insightful and informative, and started to give you an introduction into the two tools, but also how we're improving the ways that they talk to one another and transition into them, so that, again, we get really comprehensive here. We've got a test design solution to get you the confidence and coverage in the way you're designing tests, but now also, of course, the seamless execution of those optimized scenarios with Studio. So that's what we're here to offer these days. Let us know if you're interested in one of those tools or both of them, and we can take it from there. So thank you all for joining. I'll speak for both myself and Aaron on Aaron's behalf, that we really appreciate you joining, and hope to talk to some of you all again soon. So thanks, everyone. Hope you have a good rest of the day.